with the scent of potpourri. Films we commit to memory. Crossing the felt ropes, watching from home on my TV, looking at all my eyes can see. They tell me I view obsessively.
Hello and welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. I'm your host, Matt Hurt, and you can find me on social media, including Letterboxd at Obsessive Viewer. And on this special episode of the podcast, I'm closing out my Heartland Film Festival 2024 coverage with a chat with Michael Husain, whose documentary The Waiting Game had its world premiere to a sold-out audience and won the Indiana Spotlight Documentary Audience Choice Award at this year's festival. Michael can be found on Instagram at Good Vibes Media and at goodvibesmedia.com, and the film can be followed on Facebook at the Waiting Game Movie Facebook page. His film, The Waiting Game, is an epic documentary of cold capitalism versus simple human need. The Waiting Game follows a tiny not-for-profit's fight against the NBA as it delays and ignores payment to the ABA players who built so much of its value. Welcome to the show, Michael Husain. Thank you so much for joining me. How's it going?
It's going great, and thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, of course. We met at Heartland, and we chatted a bit just before the premiere of your film, and I was able to make it to it, and man, I loved it. Documentaries are so fascinating to me. I think I told you, I rambled about that to you at the after party we met at, but like they're just such an amazing piece of art, just all told. So like to see one that fires on all cylinders like this and tells a very important and heartbreaking story at numerous points is really great. It's a poignant documentary. I loved it. So yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's really nice to hear things like that, not only from, somebody who's has a critical eye, but also, this was just a few days ago that this happened. So for the most part, people haven't seen this film. So to kind of get reaction that this was a 2.5-year process to make this film, that the connection points we were trying to make, hoping to make, actually got there. That's great for a filmmaker.
Yeah, like I said, I loved it. The Q&A also at the end after it was just incredibly insightful. It feels like the audience, just like everyone is on the same page with the messaging of the movie. The story being told was told incredibly well. Like you said, it's a 2.5-year process. Like I'm going to dig into this a little bit more. So, just the idea of setting out to make a documentary about a subject and then putting 2.5 years of your life into it and finding the story, finding how it comes together in the edit and soon before it premieres and everything is just, it's a fascinating process to me. And I'll dig deep into the process with you and everything, but it's an incredible feat. And I'm sure at the end of this journey, with it now being out and having its premiere and everything, I'm sure you can probably rest a little easy, but it's just something that I admire the filmmaking process of it. So congratulations.
Thank you. It definitely is a huge process. It's an undertaking. And I've made enough of these to know that, but each time you start one, you think, oh, well, this one will be easier. This one will be quicker. I'm smarter. I'm better. But nope, they're all very, very difficult as the further you get into them. And so, yeah, we were, you meet people and they share things with a certain intimacy with you. They're trusting you with their story. And so the more people that do that, the more I feel a responsibility then to tell their story well, honestly, and have people understand their perspective. Sometimes it might not even be a perspective that I necessarily agree with, but the fact that if it's an authentic perspective, then it deserves its due. So a lot of documentary storytelling is that, right? Trying to sort of layer different perspectives on, so that and the audience too isn't quite sure what's going to come next. Hopefully it's not what you expected, and that continues to unfold a story. So there's a lot to go into it.
Oh yeah. And speaking of unexpected things and everything, like I believe you told me that you originally kind of envisioned this as it was going to be a short film. It was going to be a short documentary film. And then everything just went the way it did. So like, can you speak to how like you juggled that? Like how, like when did you come to the decision that, okay, this is a bigger story than I can tell in a short fashion?
So there's a the baseline of the film is that this old basketball league, the American Basketball Association, or the ABA, rival league to the NBA for 9 years, 1967 to 1976. And they were incredibly innovative in lots of different ways, not only on the court, but off the court. And much of what you see in today's NBA game, which is mushroomed into a global business that's worth tens of billions of dollars. And, much of that came from the ABA, actually, not the NBA's own lineage. But the NBA always had some money. And so they basically gobbled up the ABA, took its best parts, and moved forward. And the ABA ceased to exist. The players, that was a business deal, right? So there were contracts, and there were all sorts of lawyers, and out of that deal, the ABA players, many of whom had played for 8 or 9 years in the ABA, and were towards the end of their career, they didn't really go into the NBA, or didn't go to the NBA for very long. They thought that the deal said that they had benefits. They had health care, retirement, a pension, and flash forward 25, 30 years, they're reaching out to the NBA to say, hey, how do I set up my pension? And the NBA is saying, I'm sorry, I don't see that you have a pension. And so that deal gone bad, and the investigation into it is sort of the heart of the film. And there was a small not-for-profit that was founded here in Indianapolis called the Dropping Dimes Foundation, founded by an eye doctor, Dr. John Abrams, and a lawyer, Scott Tarter. And they, particularly Scott, because he was a lawyer, started delving into the legal background. Like, how could it be that, because the consequences of these players, some of these players not having retirement benefits were dire. Some guys did very well. Other guys were at a point where they couldn't afford their life-saving medicine, their insulin, and that sort of thing. They couldn't afford rent. They were being evicted. So it was urgent. And so Scott started looking into some of the documentation, and I met Scott. This is December of 2021. And he was doing a fundraiser. He was selling these shirts, and I got one, and he started telling me about Dropping Dimes. I knew it was a fundraiser for Dropping Dimes, but I really had no idea what it was. I just liked the shirts.
Sure.
And so, he started telling me that they had actually been negotiating with the NBA to try and get ABA guys benefits, and that a lot of guys were really struggling on it, which I found hard to believe. These guys, for the generation that may not remember the ABA, these guys were every bit as good as any NBA player that you see today or that played back then. Some of them had been Olympians. They were extraordinary athletes. And so to think that those men could kind of fall upon these incredibly hard times seemed kind of impossible. But he claimed that it was very possible, and it was happening. And that they'd been negotiating with the NBA for about, at that point, 12, 13 months. And he thought it was really close. He thought that by February of 2022, so roughly 6-7 weeks from the time that I had met him, that they were going to have an announcement. And it was going to be that the NBA was going to give money to the ABA guys, that kumbaya, and it was going to be a great happy ending story. It was like, Well, it is a cool story. And you guys have been working hard at it. I'd like to follow you guys. And because you can't recreate the moment when that good news comes.
Right.
So he actually wasn't super enthusiastic about it, but he kind of let us go along. And it wasn't more than, again, you know, I knew from as a filmmaker, I could shoot for 3 or 4 days with them, a Zoom call with the NBA as they're negotiating. Maybe the call or right after he gets the call from, or an email from the NBA saying, hey, it's 2 weeks out and we're going to announce that the All-Star is going to be big. We might go to the All-Star game, see the big announcement, and that's a film.
Yeah.
A short. Mm-hmm. And so the All-Star game comes and goes. Not only no email saying we're going to do something, but nothing happens. And he does get a message from the NBA that we are really close, but it's going to be maybe a month or so. We've got to work through just a few details. It's going to happen. Okay. Another month goes by, nothing. Another month goes by, nothing. And again, as I said earlier, this was urgent for these guys. So there were guys starting to get sick. He'd gotten a couple of calls from people who were in the hospital or literally about to be evicted, sort of thing. And then, you know, the Dropping Dimes Foundation had a little bit of money. They could nurse this along, but obviously you can't nurse along health. And so one of the guys who wound up getting sick was here in Indianapolis, a guy named Sam Smith, who had played in the ABA for 5 years. And Scott had gotten to know him and become friendly with him because he's local. And Sam started to get pretty sick. And Scott, I noticed, starting to get agitated. Like, he's a very calm, kind of reserved lawyer guy. You don't see a lot of emotion out of him. I was actually thinking when we first started shooting with him, maybe this isn't going to be that good because Scott's not very emotional.
Sure. Okay.
But
that's amazing to me because he has such a magnetic on-screen presence in the documentary. That's incredible to me.
Yeah.
So yeah,
he's careful with his words, like a good lawyer. You know, he's. But I think you see over the course of the film, I actually think you see his age. You know, and by the time you get to one of the crescendo points when they're waiting for an announcement from the NBA, which is months and months and months later, he looks pretty ragged. And, you know, he's a pretty put together guy. So it's like, but anyway, when Scott started to get agitated and I started realizing that this guy, Sam Smith, who was now not well at all and struggling, and realizing then, because I'd had enough time to do a little more research on what the ABA was and how important it was from a sort of racial reckoning point of view for basketball. Yeah. Now, the NBA was integrated in the 60s, but not much. And there were some unwritten rules about how many black players there could be per team, and certainly how many black players on the court at a particular time. So here was Sam, who was black, and here were a lot of guys who were, you know, one of the things that was innovative about the ABA is they really didn't care who played. They just wanted talent. They wanted the best talent. Yeah. And so what happened real quickly was, you know, if the NBA was maybe 80%, this is rough numbers, 80% white, 20% black, the ABA was probably the inverse. And so there were a lot of talented players who didn't have an opportunity to make an NBA team. But they had, once they got a chance to play pro ball in the ABA, they were all over it. And they changed the game. You know, the pace of play, just lots of cultural aspects that surround basketball. You know, fashion. We make a point in the doc about afros, hairstyle, things like that. You know, that traditionalists in the basketball game at that point weren't comfortable with. And so this change was coming. We know that now, but the ABA really propelled it forward. And so when I came to realize that, as I saw Sam Smith, so this combination of background research that I was learning and real-time events that were happening was probably around then, long way of answering your original question.
You're good.
That I said there's a lot more to this than I thought there was. I thought it was just a feel-good thing about some guys who'd fallen on hard times. It's way more than that.
Yeah, and that gets to just the heart of the documentary is about these guys, these players who they deserve to be compensated for what they did, for not only for the NBA, but like, and for the sport itself. But like, as someone, like, I'm not a big sports guy. I'm just not interested in sports. It's my bread and butter is movies and TV. But at the heart of it, like, I feel like there is, and this can kind of be a blanket statement about pretty much any kind of entertainment thing, but like, there's this give and take with people who watch something that someone else is participating in. So as a viewer, as a fan of a sport, like, there's this level of, I guess, kinship, or this level of connection where it's like, yes, I want to watch this team play because this is my team. I want to watch these people perform these feats of talent that I will never be able to attain in my entire life. And just the idea that at the heart of the waiting game, that these guys who put their body through the ringer to play this sport, to entertain people, aren't like, to have even a little bit of a hassle to get a pension or to get healthcare, anything like that is damn near criminal, to be honest. And like, for it to go that long and to be that, like, to have this much of a David and Goliath situation is astonishing. And like, my heart breaks for the people who have been waiting and had to wait too long, weren't able to get it. It's just, it's heartbreaking. And I think that comes through incredibly in the documentary.
Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of thoughts that kind of rush through my mind as you say that. I mean, one is that, one of the things that I kind of struggled with, and my creative partner through all of this is a guy named Brian Boyd, who you were mistaken for.
I was, yes.
But he's he shot the whole film. He edited, he was our editor. And he's a producer on it, but we spent an awful lot of time batting around concepts and thoughts and shaping. And, one of the things that we really struggled with was like, okay, how bored are people going to be when you hear the word pension? I would never watch anything about pension. Like, oh my gosh, what could be worse than a story about a pension? So you have to care about the people, right? And once you care about the people, no matter what they did, right? So this happens to be a story about basketball. But these people who were clearly deserving, right? Just if you have any humanity at all, they were clearly deserving. Then you care about how because they're old men now. I mean, that's another thing that we sort of were looking at is like, how do we treat youth and age, and the elderly? We're a capitalist society, and that's not a bad thing, but the young are in their prime. And if you look at I'm no accountant, but I think, a person who values things in a company would say they're full of potential. They are assets. At the end of your life, when you're hobbling along as an old man because your joints have given out, you're now a liability. You're something we got to pay for on a balance sheet. And so how do we treat these people as gods when they're young and not so much when they're old? And what's the relative fairness of that? And it's not just basketball, right? It's you mentioned, we make an analogy to factory workers who build cars or anything else in American society, and they create tremendous value for a company. And then if the company, in the C-suite shifts, is sold, whatever, how much do they get rewarded on the factory floor? How much are they discussed in the boardroom? Generally not much at all. If you're obsessive about movies, right? So the studio heads, how much do they talk about the writers?
Yeah.
The people who crafted the initial value that actors and directors took and grew, and then yes, the studio financed things, and there's a connection point, but does all the value just go up and it doesn't come back down? That's a big part of what we're wrestling with in this documentary.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that also kind of struck me about it is the combination of how this documentary is like, it's part sports documentary, sports history, part legal drama, part just like incredibly profound, like human interest story as well. Like, how do you juggle like those three things, like, and multiple other aspects of it as well when making this, especially when, at the start of it, you're like, yeah, this will be a few days of shooting and we'll do a short film.
Right. It's sort of risky, deciding to make it very layered like that. Because it's also, the latter third of the film is almost verite. We're just in the moment, watching, dropping dimes, negotiating, and trying to get to the end point. So we had a lot of different elements moving around, but I think it came together, at least for me, like it seemed like the only way to tell it ultimately. Was, I guess we could have gone, I've done a bunch of like A&E biographies and that sort of thing, where, you always started with the birth photo, and then it was, you followed the arc of a life, longitudinally like that. But for this, we didn't know who was going to watch. So this league was relevant, was real from 1967 to 1976. Okay. So 1976, what is that? It's almost 50 years. So you really have to be almost 60 years old or older to have remembered it and appreciated it, and maybe gone to games with your parents or friends, watched it on TV if you could. So that's one audience group, right? And that makes, you would tell a story in a certain way if you were only telling it to them. But then you got everybody, 55 and younger, who may not even know that this thing existed. And so you have to explain to them that, okay, the basketball that you may know, the NBA, actually came out of this thing, the ABA, and explain why it was different and how it affected not only the game, but communities, right? Every town that the ABA was in, they were generally smaller cities, not always, but generally. And so those cities didn't have NBA teams. So the ABA teams were this community identity thing that you were talking about earlier. So they meant a lot to the people, and to the kids growing up. These were the athletic heroes. So there was that. And then you also want to talk to people like you, right? Who care about sports or basketball. My wife fits that description. So how do you then say, okay, well, you don't know about the ABA, and it's not because, of age, it's because you don't care. And so how do you make it relevant? Well, there are human beings inside those basketball uniforms, and human beings are worthy of respect and dignity and things that these guys didn't get. So now you got an injustice. So the injustice then leads to the legal drama, because there was a binder about this thick, and it had all the legal documents, and Scott Tarter, one of the co-founders of Dropping Dimes, had this. And so when he started showing us that and realizing just how complex this was. This wasn't a one pager.
Sure.
This was hundreds and hundreds of pages. And he found it. And he is not only like, maybe a lawyer who handles, I don't know, traffic court or something like that. He's a mergers and acquisitions lawyer. So this is exactly the kind of deal that he does all the time. It's businesses combining, ABA and NBA combining. That's what this was. And he found it extraordinarily difficult to navigate. He didn't understand it. He read it dozens of times. And so then it's like, okay, filmmaker now, point of view. Okay, these documents, okay, what's maybe not quite as bad as a pension, but, from a visual point of view, documents.
Yeah.
That's some slow stuff. But if there are secrets inside the documents, it starts to get interesting.
Yep.
And what he was finding essentially were secrets, because the ABA guys had tried their best. They had a lawyer. He wasn't terribly effective. And so whatever advice they got from him, it didn't seem to hold water in the long term. And so they read this hundreds of pages and came away, not just one of them, many, many, many of them would repeat the same story. So you knew it was like, right or wrong, they had a perspective. Mm-hmm. Their perspective was that this document says you have a pension that's equivalent to the NBA players. It basically says as if the two leagues, the ABA and the NBA, had always been one. Mm-hmm. That's how your retirement will be treated. So you hear that and you think, okay, I've got an NBA pension, right? And right. That's what any, I think, normal, non-legally trained person would read and think. And it does say that, and it says it in a couple of different places. Mm. And so Scott read that and was like, yeah, they're right. So why is this an issue? Like, the NBA's got a lot of great lawyers and they would understand their legal obligations. Like, how could this be this? So there's a mystery happening. So now the documents start to get interesting. And they start to reveal a pattern of thinking, I guess, on both sides. And we just we really try not to pick a side and just sort of let things tell themselves. We certainly do that in terms of the testimony of players or the testimony from the NBA itself, in terms of how all this stuff came to be or how it was resolved. But we sort of tried to let the documents do that too. While we'll give you the context, there were lots of different lawsuits and people were trying to get to this objective or that objective, but try not to sort of say, and this is bad or this is good.
Right.
But wherever we can, try and let the audience do that. But I mean, obviously your hearts are with the players. I mean, because the players are the ones who are struggling.
Yeah.
So the layers happened organically because we kept getting to the point, well, okay, we've told the story of these players and we've told the story of these human beings. And here's the conflict they're facing. They think they've got something coming and it hasn't come. So we got to get into the documents. And then we have these kind of shining knights, the guys who started this not-for-profit, who are not making any money. In fact, it's costing them money and a whole lot of time. And we want to see what happens to them, right? They're going into a sort of a noble battle. And so we have to see what happens to them too. And that's kind of how it all plays out.
Yeah. And that level of kind of objectivity, I guess, that the documentary has, where it's not necessarily picking a side. It's like, it's clear. It makes it more clear to the audience that, yeah, this tens of billions of dollars of a corporation is, you know, maybe they are like at fault here a little bit, but you let the audience come to that naturally. So like when, I'm not going to give it away, but there's a moment, like a showstopper moment at the end of the documentary that I feel like in a documentary that would have positioned itself like from the outset positioned itself as anti one side, pro one side, and that would have been like the big defining thing of it. And it still is a defining moment in the documentary, but because there is that just emphasis on just giving the information to the audience, that gasp that we get as audience members isn't like I knew it. I knew what was going on. It's more like our jaws are dropping as our hearts are dropping for the people that are affected by this, rather than positioning ourselves between like one side or the other. So yeah, I think that comes across incredibly well, and just beautifully edited together as well.
That's Brian. Yeah. So, you know, Brian's got a great touch, and thank you. I mean, because that's what we were hoping to do. Yeah. And so, and you know, if we got there for you and hopefully for others, then it was worth it, right?
Yeah.
These are projects to some degree, for sure. You know, you have to. Independent filmmaking is also, you know, you got to find distribution, and you got to kind of, you know, you got to find the money to make it happen. But it's in the heart, it's the story. You want the story to be what you just said, that it gets you.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it affected me as someone who, like I said, has no interest in basketball or anything. Like there's something that I latched onto very early on in the documentary is something that I love in any kind of like documentary or any kind of film. It's just showing the passion of people that are doing something that they love, are interested in something that they truly love and care about. And a big part of the early part of the documentary is just like kind of our introduction to Scott, is his connection to the ABA, his connection to growing up being a fan, and his like memorabilia that he has, all of these things. It's like you can just feel like that passion radiating off the screen, and like that's our hook into it. Like I'm like, okay, this is a basketball documentary, I'm all in, because this guy cares about this subject, and that is coming through really clearly.
Yeah, he should have a podcast. So, you know, the obsessed ABA guy, he will completely nerd out on it.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's also, I wanted to highlight as well the archival footage. This is not like, I have no like, this is not leading into a question or anything, but just I think that like the interspersing of like archival footage and just like that just transports us back to when the ABA was active and was going on, and that goes a long way as well to the audience, especially for someone who's not, you know, interested in basketball.
Yeah, I mean, it is really amazing, and one of the great things about the ABA and the era it was in is that it's still super visual. It's not like it was 1876 that it was. You know, so we have this footage of it, but it's also not very good footage. It's like, it's a little hazy. It's a little, it's like a memory, right? So if you were thinking back 20 years ago, I kind of remember that in one way. It's, you know, they're not exactly vivid images anymore in your head. And yet what you see, if you're a basketball fan, this is more sports fan-y, but what you see is the movement and the style that is what you see today. In fact, my wife, the first cut that she saw was like, she didn't get the racial change component, because it's like, well, that's what I'm seeing. That's what it's always been, right? Like, no, that the point is we're trying to make it that it's not. And she said, but it looks the same, and that is the point. So you can see, hey, look who's here.
Yep, there we go. There's Pizza Roll has made her appearance on the show.
Great Pizza Roll.
Yep.
But yeah, so the archival footage helps. We tried to let it do a little bit of its own storytelling, And in yes, it's coverage of kind of the points we're making, but it's also it's sort of just era defining. It you feel the history, and yet it also feels relevant. It was, and we struggled with that early on. We thought maybe we need, speaking to a younger audience who doesn't know the AVA history nor care at the beginning. How do we make it relevant? Like, how do we say, like, this footage, this old footage, is just as cool as the stuff you see now? We thought about maybe we should have like an Instagram flip kind of vibe to it. And we played around with that, but then it started to feel like we were forcing a stylistic thing. And I think a lot of what we did in the edit, once we found our path, was back off. Like, this wound up being a really kind of authentic story all the way through, because these guys suffering, the guys who are struggling and the guys who need help, it's really authentic. When you see, guys limping or, struggling, their hearts aren't as good as they once were, or 77-year-old 6-time all-star driving an Uber to make ends meet. That's real stuff. And so if you start polishing up stuff, it didn't feel right to us. So we backed off. Let the footage play. And I think ultimately that worked. But we tried lots of things. There's lots of things that aren't in there that that we took out. At one point, the narration, first of all, there's narration, which I don't usually like to do, but it's a complex story, so I kind of needed to. And then, but we backed off the narration. Sometimes it might have been a little more heavy-handed early on. And then we're like, no, we don't need to tell them that. They're going to feel it. If we've done our job, they'll feel it. So back off. And then that's what was the magic of when it premiered, is like, okay, all these points where we hoped that there was a beat that we created, that the audience would feel something, and we didn't tell them to feel something, would they feel it? And they did. So like that was amazing.
Nice. Yeah. I was going to ask you also about that narration, because you do the voiceover narration yourself. There's a lot of instances where you are, you're interviewing the subjects that are on screen. And I know that you have a lengthy background in documentary filmmaking. So you said that that's something that you don't normally like to do or like to inject into your filmmaking. How was that different this time around? Did you have trouble getting a comfort level with that? Because I think it was fantastic in terms of just voiceover and delivering that information to us.
Thank you. I'm comfortable. Like, I've been doing this for a while now. So, stylistic things have happened in documentary filmmaking. So, in the 90s, when I was doing A&E biographies or things like that, and those are narration driven. I did some of the narration myself, so I'm used to the idea of narrating. But the more my filmmaking and just, I think, documentary storytelling in general, as it's grown, there's a sense that you don't necessarily need a narrator all the time. That you can get by with some space and pausing and music and let the audience kind of drink some stuff in. And then if you've done your interviews well enough and maybe, done enough of them, that the story can carry itself, or, a piece of archive, a newspaper headline, or sometimes a news broadcast. I don't think we used any news broadcasts, but sometimes in a true crime piece, you're going to break into the local news, helping tell the story of what happened that day in the courtroom, sort of thing. And so the less there's a voice that you don't really know, that's not truly associated with the story, kind of jumping in there, like it's a vibe break. It can be. So I think the last 3, 4, 5 films I've made, no narration. And And I started this one that way too. But it was really clear, really fast that, okay, for those who don't know the ABA, how are you going to tell them, it started here, it ended there. So I tried to make the narration fact-based. Mm-hmm. So here are these facts that you need to know, not emotion-based. There is emotion in the voiceover in that we tried not to make it super newsy, where and the ABA was established in 1976. We tried not to do that, but to make it more conversational, because, and Brian, my collaborator on this, laughed and said it reminded him of the Sandlot's narration. Huh. Where it's the guy who used to call the baseball games, but he's telling you a story of his childhood. So it's got a little bit of authority to it, but it's also conversational. So so that became our kind of model, like when we would rewrite something. Okay, what would the Sandlot guy say? So but it also, I mean, I rationalized this probably, but because you hear my voice asking questions inside the interviews, I am a little bit a part of the story, just as this off-camera question asker. Mm-hmm. And so the same voice now that is sort of telling you key factual details that you need to understand whatever's coming next. And so that's how we got there. And again, towards the end, we pulled some narration. All the way till very close to the end, we were pulling blocks of narration. So there's less in there than there used to be.
Wow. Yeah. And when you mentioned that about wanting to avoid being like a newscaster voice and everything, that I think you nailed the tone specifically, because it is that informative kind of narration, but it is, again, it is at its heart a story about people who are struggling and need to get their due. And so I think that there's a really good balance there of having that tone be informative while also being obviously compassionate, and being able to just guide the audience into this story about, people that need this long running stalemate be resolved immediately, like years ago at this point. So yeah, I think that was a great narration.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. So what were some of the other challenges of it? When you go into making a documentary of any size, what was something you found as a challenge in the creation of this one, that you maybe didn't anticipate when you decided to switch it over from short film to feature?
Yeah, I mean, there were a number of things, how many shoot days that we're going to do. Mm-hmm. Outside of Indianapolis. I thought it was very Indianapolis centric. Mm-hmm. And, we could get a couple of ABA players who still live in Indianapolis, and we could make it, local. Yeah. But then the bigger it got, the more, I would say sort of, more sort of universally important, less community based. Then it's okay, well, Bob Costas will talk to us. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, I got to go to New York. We wound up having to go to New York 2 or 3 times, because later the ABA said they would talk. So we went there and we found one of the original lawyers from the NBA's negotiation side of what's called the merger. So it turns out, I think that he's one of only 2, maybe 3 lawyers who are left. Oh, wow. From the team of lawyers that were in the room hammering that out. Wow. And so that was an important thing to get him and to get his perspective. And again, I think I'd be interested to hear what you think, but from my perspective, he was just straight shooting. I'm a lawyer. This is my job. I represent the big bad wolf in this case, but my job is to do X, Y, and Z. And so that's what I did. I didn't like do anything super crafty or anything. It's like, this is normal.
Yeah. And that was such an interesting part of the documentary as well, because there's that moment where Scott is kind of like watching the footage of him talking, and like just like that interesting like mutual, like they're both professionals in their field, and like he's like, yeah, I mean that's how I would, that's how I would have done it. Like it's like it just seems like, I think that kind of goes back to it being a somewhat objective viewpoint of the story, because there isn't like he's not like this evil lawyer. Like, I know there's a lot of people who like to make evil lawyer jokes and everything, but like this is just like people that are hired to do a job, and they're doing that job, and you know, as
it's systemic,
painful,
right?
Yeah.
It's systemic, and so you know, if human, it's like, you know, AI or robots or whatever. Like, if humans don't have a place in this case, hardcore negotiations of a mergers and acquisitions deal, if nobody stands up and says, well, what's the human consequence here,
right,
then bad things can happen.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's really what it is. It's like, it's not that the NBA is a bad guy here. They're a large corporation doing what large corporations do. So what it needed for this to be avoided was somebody to say, there's a humanistic question here that's not at all anything that your legal minds or your accounting minds are going to bring into consideration. Somewhere somebody needed to do that. And things might have been different. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And hopefully better things come of this, like going forward. I wanted to talk really quickly about the Indianapolis aspect of it. You're from Indy. You like the majority of the film was shot here in Indy. Yeah. How do you feel like talking about how the kind of Indiana aspect of it is, especially with Indiana being very much a baseball state
or a basketball
state? Geez. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It was very, very important, right? I mean, so, you know, Scott Tarter, so the two co-founders of Dropping Dimes are both basketball obsessed. John Abrams, the doctor, was a Pacers ball boy. He's worked for the Pacers actually as their eye doctor for close to 40 years, and he has been around that team forever. He's very, very passionate about that team and basketball in general. Scott grew up and also his dad he worked at Ford. He was a factory worker, and one of the few times that he got to spend time with his dad was when they either watched Pacers games on TV or went themselves. And so, you know, he was a kid. You could imagine riding his bike on the east side of Indianapolis, dreaming of being a Pacer. Like lots of us, you know, lots of people grow up idolizing, whether it's athletes or actors or whatever it is. You find somebody that you want to emulate. And so this community really rallied around the Pacers and in many different ways. And so, and obviously it's got a state that's deep in high school basketball history. We have national championships coming out of Purdue and Indiana University, and almost Butler. You know, so we're passionate, right? So certain states are known for certain things. So, you know, ice hockey in Minnesota, football in Texas. Indiana's got basketball. And so it made sense that the Dropping Dimes Foundation set up to help all AVA players, not just former Pacers, would come out of Indiana. Like there's a connection point that's it would have been more unusual if this little not-for-profit popped up Peoria.
Right.
This was a city and a state where basketball was central.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And the footage also of the city, just like there's some gorgeous shots of Indy. Like there's that one the one scene where you go to Scott goes to the east side where he used to play basketball, like that kind of closed down building. He's the court's still there. It's just like you have that history is just there. It exists. It's so beautiful.
That scene, I love that scene. It's one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about in the film the same thing that we're talking about just a minute ago, which is this sort of passion that people have for basketball and for their teams here. And what you're describing is there's a basketball court in the parking lot of a church on the east side, which was a block or two from where Scott grew up. So this was his home court, so to speak. He would play with his brother, with his friends on this court. What makes me laugh in terms of, sometimes people will say basketball is a religion in Indiana, is that the church is no longer, the church is boarded up, but the basketball court is still there.
Yep. That's you can't buy that kind of imagery in a film. Like you just can't. It's such an Indiana thing. It's beautiful. I love that. Yeah. So I don't want to take up too much more of your time or anything, but I do want to ask you about Dropping Dimes, if only to just give the audience like a vessel for which they can go and support them.
Yep.
So Dropping Dimes is a foundation that was started in Indiana, and it's specifically to help the ABA players. Can you speak more to Dropping Dimes?
Well, it's obviously, if this film was a passion project for me, the co-founders of the Dropping Dimes Foundation, Dr. John Abrams and Scott Tarter, and board member Ted Green, this was a passion project for them. And even though there's been progress, and the film will reveal the progress that's been made towards helping the ABA guys, there are still significant needs. There are guys who got left out of the progress that was made. There are widows of ABA players. I mean, these guys, there are only about 140, 150 of them left. And once they die, any benefits that they've gained so far cease. So widows, there are no survivors benefits yet. These are the sorts of things that we hope. I hope as a filmmaker who got to know these guys, but they are super committed to. So for people who want to help the ABA guys that need help and their families, the Dropping Dimes Foundation is still that place. And so, but they're incredibly decent, committed human beings who are trying to help other human beings. Like that's sort of the baseline of it. They happen to funnel it through this love of ABA basketball, but they're committed and really and all three just great guys.
Nice. That's great. And to the listener, if you want to check out Dropping Dimes, go to droppingdimes.org and you can find more information on that organization and how you can help get the word out and just help people get what they deserve for the things that they're able to do, that they were able to do. It's just it's a travesty that it's taken so long, but I applaud you and the whole team behind The Waiting Game for making such a again poignant and just at times heartbreaking, but also uplifting and powerful documentary about just the fight to get what's right for people who deserve it. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, the hope is, that the documentary, it's an independent film, right? So it's a film that I made. And so, it has its own financial interests and distribution interests.
Yeah.
You're trying to get it seen by as many people as possible. Sometimes that's done through community screenings, and we'll do more screenings here in Indianapolis, and we're going to try and take it to other ABA cities. So it's the screenings in Louisville or Denver or Salt Lake City or other places. And those will be great. But I think that in each of those, and we've had informal conversations about it with Dropping Dimes, but at each of those, there should be an opportunity for giving to Dropping Dimes as well, right? So it's they need the help, and I think there's no more fertile audience probably for giving than somebody who has just seen the Waiting Game. Like the Waiting Game is their mission sort of personified, and even though it wasn't made by Dropping Dimes, and if I found out something not so pretty about Dropping Dimes, I would have put it in the film. But it's like their intentions are very pure, as far as I can tell.
That's great, and yes, that immediate reaction, kind of like surge of energy, like that was evident in the Q&A. Like the audience, like multiple people were like, "Okay, how can we do that? How can we help? Like, how can we do this?" It's just it was beautiful.
Were fired up, and and some for a filmmaker. I've done a few films and Q&As before, and it's really great when you get positive feedback to the story beats and the things you were trying to do as a director. But when your audience got your film and then transitioned to activism, like I said, another level, like not only do we like your story and your film, but we want to do something about it. Yeah. That's amazing. And so we got that at the premiere, and it was really extraordinary. And I hope it continues to generate that kind of response, because then things will change. Oh, absolutely. Things will get better.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'm looking forward to following the Waiting Game as you guys take it to different places, and as more people see it, I think it's going to do a lot of good. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. And my final question for you, and then I'll let you go. Sure. How was it premiering it at Heartland? I know you have a long history with Heartland as well, but like, how did it feel having that world premiere, that sold out experience, and winning the Audience Choice Award for Indiana Spotlight documentary?
In a word, it was fantastic. There isn't a place that makes more sense to premiere it than Heartland. This is one of those films, I think, that has an opportunity to have a national audience. But because of some of the things that we've already talked about, and the Indiana connections, and I'm from Indiana, and so is the organization, and so is one of the teams, like this was the spot. And so to sell out, I mean, the Tobias Theater at Newfields, which is where we were, 530 seats, I think. That's a lot of energy. It's a lot of people. Oh yeah. And so it was really cool. And to stick around. And then we had, former ABA players there, as well as, one of the things we haven't talked about a ton is we also had Dana Hunsinger-Bedbo, who writes for The Star.
Oh, yes.
He wrote several stories along the way that really cut through and got either the NBA's attention or NBA players' attention. They were written for the Indianapolis Star, which is connected to the Gannett system, so that several of them went to the USA Today and became national. And she was there and deserves tremendous credit.
Oh, absolutely.
What she did, and the power of journalism. I mean, I'm a big believer in the power of journalism. Yep. I know it catches a lot of political trash, but in general, all the journalists that I know care and are trying to do right by the truth. And so anyway, she was great, and it was great that she was there. So that was really, really cool. And then winning the Audience Choice Award, that was, of the awards, that's maybe the most important one. It's like I don't even know if the People's Choice Awards still exist, but there are things of industry professionals and juries that make decisions, and those are great and they're important. I'm not denigrating them at all, but you're making a film like this anyway, to appeal, appeal's the wrong word, but to connect with a wide audience. This isn't what some might call an art house film, where the audience is a little more narrow. This is pretty broad, and so the Audience Choice Award for a film like this is super important, and at least for me. And then hopefully it also propels you. There will be other film festivals down the road that will look at, they premiered at Heartland. Heartland's considered a top 50 film festival, maybe top 25. And so it premiered at a worthy festival. The audience responded to it in a great way. So, that might help elevate it a little bit. And, so much of distribution in things like that for an independent film is about momentum. It gives you a little just sprinkle of momentum. Nice.
Well, I wish you all the best with going forward with the Waiting Game. I have full faith that it'll find its audience. You guys will do a lot of great work through that too. And I thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else we didn't discuss that you want to touch on, or
I don't think so that I can think of now. But where did Pizza Roll get her name? So here's the funny like small story of that is I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and when I decided I'm going to get a cat, there was an adoption event. I was like, you know what? I'm a big Stephen King fan. One of my favorite books of his is Pet Sematary. So in a very kind of dark way, I wanted to get a boy cat and name him Winston Churchill, after the cat in Pet Sematary. By the time I got to the adoption event, there was only 2 cats remaining. One was named Ghost, and one was named Pizza Roll. And I kind of connected more to Pizza Roll, and then like that, they were like, yeah, this is a girl cat, and I was like, okay, and I picked her up, and then they're like, and her name's Pizza Roll, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is my cat. This is my cat. Yeah, okay, fine. Great.
So yeah. So. Okay. That's the story of Pizza Roll, the official mascot of the Obsessive Viewer podcast.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And deserving.
Thank you. Yes. So once again, before we go, can you tell people where they can find you online, social media, and anywhere they can find the film, The Waiting Game?
So Instagram, Good Vibes Media, the Facebook, we have a film page, which is The Waiting Game Movie. And the Dropping Dimes, I think I hope I get it right, but you guys search Dropping Dimes or Dropping Dimes Foundation. You'll find them.
Great. And of course, I will put links to all of this in the show notes of this episode. So feel free to check those and get the word out on this. If you're listening to this and you're interested, get the word out, follow the film, make sure you see it when you have the opportunity to. So
co-producer Amy Pozek would be all over. She is one of the best film publicists I've ever seen, and we're fortunate to have her as a co-producer on the film. And she is just huge on spread the word, tell your friends, post about it, share, and that has a momentum, an algorithmic momentum that is huge. So Amy would have been stabbing me if I didn't say share.
Of course. And Amy's great. I have kind of like brushed shoulders with her over the years, but we met at the red carpet event for the night before the premiere, before Off the Record, and like we were both on the red carpet, and she's amazing. Like she's just so friendly and very personable, and so
he is 100% positive energy. Like you just gotta love that. You can't not have a conversation with Amy and not come away with a smile.
Oh, absolutely.
So, it's just positive. And we need more of those.
Yep. 100% agree. Well, Michael, thank you so much for your time today and for making the film. It's a great, important film. And like I said, I can't wait for more people to see it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
They tell me I view obsessively.
All right. And that was my interview with Michael Husain of the Waiting Game movie, which had its premiere at Heartland Film Festival this year here in Indianapolis. Of course, links to everything is in the show notes of this episode. For me, you can find more of my work, including my written reviews, full episode show notes, and the complete backlog of our episodes at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also write into the show by emailing me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. And if you'd like to support us and get access to hundreds of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And that's it for this special episode of The Obsessive Viewer. And that is it for our coverage of Heartland Film Festival 2024. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll be back with a new episode this week, a new full episode this week, reviewing, it's hopefully going to be Smile 2 and Your Monster, but that should be going up on Thursday. So once again, thank you guys so much for listening, and thank you, Michael, for all of his time and chatting about the film. And I really hope that you guys listening seek out this film and see it when you can. So thank you so much for listening, and make sure to follow the show on social media and subscribe to the podcast on your preferred podcast app. Also, you can check out Obsessive Viewer Podcast's other shows, Tower Junkies, a Stephen King podcast hosted by Tiny and myself, and Anthology, the Twilight Zone and classic sci-fi podcast hosted by me. I also keep forgetting to mention that sometime next month I will be making an appearance on my friends Andy and Logan, their podcast Odd Trilogies. So I will be on that show sometime next month. I'll let you guys know, but go ahead and give them a follow and check out their show. So until the next episode, thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. And now, enjoy this short clip from a recent Patreon exclusive episode. For the full episode and more Patreon exclusive content, sign up at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And this is a wonderful, perfect opening movie for this festival, because it very much just feels like it embodies that, like, I think the Heartland does, like, truly moving pictures as a designation of movies. This is 100% that. It's moving, it's funny, it's witty. The performances are incredible. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's wonderfully in keeping with the ethos of Heartland Film Festival. Thank you for listening to the Obsessive Viewer podcast. This episode was produced and edited by me, Matt Hurt. If you have feedback, thoughts on our episodes, or just want to connect, you can email me at matt@obsessiveviewer.com. For more information on this show, including a full archive of our episodes and show notes, visit obsessiveviewer.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please give us a follow on social media and subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. Also, consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible to help increase our visibility and grow our community. If you want to support the show and get early access to new episodes, as well as a steady stream of exclusive episodes, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. For information on more podcasts presented by obsessiveviewer.com, visit obsessiveviewer.com/podcasts. Our theme song is A Little Mad Sometimes by As Good As It Gets. For more of their music, check them out on Spotify and at asgoodasitgetsmusic.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Get up to 2 months of free podcasting service with Libsyn. Check out the show notes for your promo code to get started podcasting today.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.